Coming up on the Tall Mike Wine Podcast.
Another great thing about bartending, I think, is no 2 days are the same.
Ever. Even though they start off exactly the same.
Every day starts off exactly the same, right? Even the same clothing.
Yeah. Day on the Green with Journey, Cheap Trick, Molly Hatchet, and Black Sabbath.
Oh, my God.
And my parents, for some reason, thought that me and my 14-year-old friend would be perfectly fine in the company of his 19-year-old brother at a concert at the Day on the Green. Boy, that was a big mistake.
And now, the Tall Mike Wine Podcast.
The cell phones have been silenced. The wine is poured. And it's a little different this time around. And just like that, the podcast begins. The Tall Mike Wine Podcast. The wine podcast that's not all about wine. The wine podcast like no other. I'm your host, Mike Stone. Some people call me Tall Mike. They call me that because I'm taller than average. Also, my obsession with wine is well above average. I'm into it. This is the Wine Podcast, now heard in 81 countries on 6 continents and in 48 of these United States. Coast to coast, from Davenport, Florida to Waxhaw, North Carolina. From McHenry, Illinois to Incline Village, Nevada. And wherever you are, I'm glad you found the podcast. Now help me out with a few things. 1, be sure you're subscribed so you don't miss an episode. 2, if you're new here, welcome. Now get yourself caught up. Scroll through the previous episodes and listen to a few so you get a feel for the whole thing. 3, give me a rating on whatever app you're listening. These things, I am told, help out a lot. Now, for extra credit, you can actually chip in a few bucks for the care and feeding of the podcast. Become a sponsor. Click the Support the Show link in the show notes right there on your phone. Thank you in advance for helping me keep the show commercial-free. And now on to episode 59 from my studio in Novato, California, where normally I do the Zoom interviews. And as I've said before, my neighbors don't know what I'm up to. But my guest is also here. He lives in Novato, the same town. So for the first time, an interview here in the condo. He is a writer of columns in our local newspaper, and he's written books. He's also an award-winning bartender, awarded the best bartender 8 times by the readers of 3 different publications. So if you're thirsty, he's a good guy to know. Oh, and he also has his own podcast. We're going to talk about all of it. Welcome to the podcast, the Barfly himself, Jeff Burkhart. Hello, Jeff.
Well, hello, Mike. Nice to be here.
Thanks for coming out this afternoon. You're still bartending full-time, yes?
I am, not full-time, but I am still bartending.
A few nights a week?
Couple nights a week.
Keeping your hands in it?
Yep.
Excellent. What year was it when someone first put you behind a bar to start mixing things up? Do you remember?
87.
1987? Oh, my God.
Yeah.
You're approaching your 45th anniversary?
Indeed.
Wow.
Yes, I thought about that. That's why 20 Years Behind Bars, which is the name of my book, is a little ironic because it's actually a lot more than that.
It's been a little longer than that. How old were you at that time?
22.
Was it scary as shit?
The first shift was. I mean, my first shift on my own was I had an experience with, I remember a woman ordered a white label.
Okay.
And I didn't know what that was.
I don't know what that is either.
And I thought I know red label and I know black label, Johnny Walker.
Oh, right. Yeah,
and so
okay.
I didn't want to look like a complete imbecile, but I really fumbled around. Turned out it was Dewar's.
Oh,
Dewar's
yes.
white label.
The Dewar's white label.
And for the rest of my entire bartending career, no one has ever ordered it by calling it white label again.
No, I don't think that's what people call it.
They don't, right? But she did, and she was quite mean about it.
Bartending is one of those things that's such a multitasking operation. I spent several years managing restaurants, and in many of those capacities, I was the manager of the bar and the bar program. And I did that because of my fascination with wine. People would hire me. Oh, this guy knows wine. He can make a wine list. He can sell wine. He can train the staff. But you're also in charge of the liquor and the beer. And when somebody needs to hop behind the bar and help the bartender, it's usually that guy.
Yeah.
And I never worked as a bartender. I never trained as a bartender. And I'm really tall. And I found out really quickly that you can't see all the things that are under the bar. There's that little stash under the bar. You've got your little cans of pineapple juice.
Right.
Other things that come in small containers are under the bar. And I'd be like, where's the pineapple juice? They're like, it's under the bar. I'm like, I can't see it.
You got to bend down and look. Yeah.
So whenever I would have to get behind the bar, it was always just like the heartbeat started pounding harder and harder, because you're not only making drinks for the people at the bar, which is fun, right? You're talking to them, you're making drinks for them. And then there's that printer that keeps printing out little tickets. You're making drinks for the whole restaurant.
Yep.
And a lot of times you're by yourself.
Yep.
Some nights, like a busy night, you might have another bartender behind you. And maybe, what luxury, a bar back.
Well, and both of those can be a problem too, because if the other bartender gets in the way, it can be an issue. If you don't get along with the other bartender, that can be an issue. Bar backs, one thing, constantly is, I always tell them, I said, any new bar back, I said, the most important thing is stay out of the way. It's more important to be out of the way than in the way. Because it's like you said, there's a lot of things going on. It's like a juggler. So if someone knocks one of those things out of the way, everything kind of collapses.
How long does it take to work with another bartender before you get to know their rhythm and the way they move?
Well, with professionals, usually pretty quick.
Okay.
I mean, you can fit in, because it's one of these things it's much like talking to people in the industry. People in the industry speak the same language.
That's true.
They know these different things that happen. They've all had these same experiences. There might be some variables here and there, but by and large, things operate the way they operate. And so professional bartenders know what they're doing. It's also pretty easy to tell when someone's not a professional bartender.
Sure, if they're just a poser back there.
Yes, and we get a lot of those.
Oh,
right?
Well, yeah, because everybody wants to be a bartender.
Right.
And everybody wants to say they're a bartender, because that's sexy.
Yes.
I guess probably the biggest issue would be if you were a veteran bartender like yourself and you were working with somebody who was a new-ish bartender who had no real rhythm of their own and no real movement patterns.
Yeah.
They're sort of flailing about.
Yeah, well, flailing is the word for it. That's the exact word. Right. In the weeds is the other one that
weeds.
But it just, they start knocking things over, breaking things, cutting themselves. That sort of thing. That happens a lot.
Oh, man.
So luckily I haven't had to work with somebody like that in a very long time, because one of the things about the pandemic where I worked, we went down to a skeleton staff, but that skeleton staff was all very seasoned.
We are recording this episode the day before the election. You are listening to this episode, of course, a day or two after the election, or maybe a week after, or maybe a year after. I don't know. It is the Monday before the election in 2024. How do you feel today, Jeff?
I feel pretty good, actually. So
Okay.
I'm not working tomorrow. So at the last election, I had a funny person, a person in front of me looked me dead in the eye and said, "Why did you sit me next to a lefty?" And I'm like, I don't know what to say to that. I'm like, what are you talking about? I don't know what people's political affiliations are. They meant a left-handed person. They were right-handed and they were bumping elbows. And I think they did that on purpose, but it was one of those moments where I'm like, right? What's going to happen here?
Right. They're going to start talking politics.
Right. And then we're going to have to ask them to leave.
And that whole talking politics thing used to be okay to a degree. Now it doesn't seem to work at all.
No, it doesn't.
Things have changed.
Yes.
There's been a shift.
Well, it's interesting thing about elections and alcohol too is that, some states you can't buy alcohol on election day, right? There are some states
I did not know that.
Yeah, the bars are closed on election day. They don't want people drinking and voting. That seems nonsensical.
You've got a lot of arcana up in your brain, don't you? A lot of little fun facts. When I read your column, it's kind of amazing because you'll tell a story and then you'll take a word or a phrase from the story and you'll define it. And that's kind of cool.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I find the process of learning the most interesting thing. That's why I like, bartending. I like meeting people. I like talking to them. And it's not so much to understand what they think, but why they think it. And I find that fascinating. And so you can have a conversation with anybody about anything as long as you ask them, why do you think that? In a way that's non-threatening.
Another great thing about bartending, I think, is no 2 days are the same.
Ever.
Yes.
Even though they start off exactly the same.
Every day starts off exactly the same, right? Even the same clothing.
Yeah.
Your bio says you're from Western Pennsylvania rye country. Is this where you were born?
Indeed. Johnstown, Pennsylvania.
So it's in your blood.
Yep.
When did the family move to California?
1969. But my first memory of California was the People's Park riots. Because as a 4-year-old in daycare, when they start tear gassing a campus and running around, people are freaking out, that kind of puts an indelible image in your head.
So this is in Berkeley.
This is in Berkeley, yeah.
Okay. It's good to keep the babies and the young children away from the tear gas.
Well, we had to be evacuated because we were taken to the central hospital because they had central air. Oh. That way you could be safe. But that orange cloud is an image that sticks in my head.
Wow. All right, we're going to start tasting here. Now, normally on the podcast, there is wine open, but today we have a bartender with us, and he's got something a little different going on. Jeff has brought a selection of vermouth. Now, how bartendy is that? What made you want to do this, Jeff?
Well, first of all, vermouth is wine. Right. That's
yes,
the one.
It's true.
Definitely is wine. And one of those little fun facts is it's perishable wine. I do a lot of talks and public events, and people, there's always a Q&A thing. And one of the questions that people ask is my vermouth any good? And the answer is no, it isn't. Because if it's over a week old and you haven't refrigerated it,
right,
it's probably no good, just like any other wine wouldn't be.
I'm glad mine is in the fridge.
Yes.
As we speak.
Then there's the proliferation of a premium vermouth has obviously forced Manhattans back into the limelight a little bit.
Well, the vermouth is important. If you see the bartender pull out that bottle of Martini and Rossi, you're probably not in a classy joint, because that's like the bottom of the ladder kind of
Indeed.
stuff. I'm sure in whatever bar you're in, that bottle has been sitting in the rack there for who knows how long.
Right. And I make the metaphor, especially with vodka martinis. This is the most obvious way to exemplify this is vermouth is about $4 a bottle for cheap dry vermouth. Mm-hmm. And vodka is $20, $30 a bottle, depending on this. Yeah. And the point of the vermouth is to flavor the vodka in a martini. And so why would you flavor your $20 vodka with a $6 vermouth? And so that's what's happening. And the thing is, that's why most vodka martinis don't have any vermouth in them anymore. It's because the quality of that
people
vermouth
are just
declined.
They're looking for that glass full of gasoline.
Yes. Well, essentially, right?
Shaken up.
Right.
So vermouth is wine. Tell me what other people probably don't know about vermouth.
So there's two kind of classifications. There's aromatized wine, and then there's fortified wine.
Okay.
And vermouth kind of straddles the edge of that. Fortified wine would be port, right? That's the best example of it, where they add brandy as a stabilizing agent. Mm-hmm. And so vermouth, on the other hand, is wine that has had aromatics added to it. Now, the fact of the matter is they do add brandy to them now as a stabilizing agent, but generally the proof is much lower. Around 20% for port, right? Around 14% for vermouth.
So what have you got? What do you want to pour first?
So, well, like I said, all the scuttlebutt now is Carpano Antica, right?
You see that almost everywhere.
Right. The interesting story about that is Antonio Carpano is the guy who invented vermouth way back in the 1700s. Oh. So what he did was he created a red wine by making white wines red, by aromatizing them, adding some herbal agents to them, some bittering agents, and then adding coloring to it, because the scuttlebutt is that he didn't think that the women liked the red wines of his region. Typically now at this point, all red vermouth is made from white wine that's then colored.
He didn't think the women of his region.
Yes. Well, it was a different era.
This is the whole liquor industry.
Yeah.
It's all about the chicks, right?
Well, yes, it is.
I used to kid the sales reps that were coming in with the flavored vodka of the week, oh, yeah, whatever it is to get the little girls drunk, isn't it? It's always a new flavor every other week.
And very sweet, usually.
Usually,
And so there you have sweet vermouth. So that was the origin of sweet vermouth. The thing is that the original sweet vermouth that Carpano made wasn't Antica. It was something different. And then they sold that for quite a while. And then they introduced another product called Punta Mes, which you might remember, right? And Punta Mes means 1.5, so it's vermouth and bitters. So it's a more bitter vermouth. And this will make more sense when we get a look, because I brought a bittered vermouth. The point being is that then Carpano's flagship was Punta Mes for over 100 years.
Wow.
And it wasn't until the 90s that they reintroduced a red vermouth, and they called it Antica. And so people tend to think that's the original formulation. It is not, is a relatively new product put into an old looking bottle and named by an old name.
That is great knowledge.
Not to say that it isn't great, because it is quite good.
Right.
And so the idea behind it is don't take premium products and mix them with inferior products. That's not how it works. Now, what I brought today is Alicio. Now, Alicio is imported by Tempest Fugit, which is over here in Novato as well, right on the other side of the freeway from here. They import a lot of premium products from Europe. One of the ones that they brought in is a dry vermouth, but this is unoxidized. And Alicio is actually the guy who originally invented vermouth prior to Carpano, but back then there wasn't really a definition. They were white or red or whatever. It wasn't really that well defined. So he kind of got lost in the shuffle. Carpano became the more well-known, and then Noli Prat later on. But Licio was the original producer of the first vermouth ever made. This is a new company with that name. So what I brought is a dry vermouth, but as you'll see...
You can set the microphone down and get the cork out there. I know, this is... you've got a microphone in one hand. This is the way we do it. We hold the mics.
Well, this cork's not going to come out. You got a little corkscrew?
Do you want a corkscrew?
Sure.
I have a corkscrew. Hang on. All right, the bottle is open.
So we're going to go ahead and try a little bit of this. And what you'll notice is it has a much fresher flavor than what you would probably assume regular vermouth would be. Again, it's still oxidized because it is vermouth.
Yeah,
and
I can definitely smell the oxidation on there.
And vermouth, of course, means wormwood. The word vermouth is wormwood. It's a Francophile German word called vermouth. So the idea is that bittering agent is in there along with the white wine originally.
That's another thing I did not know. It's very flavorful.
Yes.
But like you said, it's
a little
very
more
fresh.
lively. Yes.
It's very fresh.
Fresher, livelier.
It's a little bit wine-like, but not really. It kind of tastes like just something really different.
Right.
Not really wine, not really a spirit at all.
In Europe, this is consumed primarily before dinner.
An aperitif?
As aperitif, exactly. And aperitif is a kind of a lost art in the United States because most people drink martinis before dinner or something of that nature, which is, of course, antithetical to eating because
it's
wine...
very strong.
It's an analgesic and an anesthetic. So not only is it numbing your senses, it's dulling your taste buds deliberately, right? So in both cases, you can't taste nearly as well after a vodka or gin martini than you could before.
Right.
It's fact of the matter.
Right. But if you have a little bit of this actually, the acidity here kind of gets my mouth watering.
Yep, it does. It actually stimulates your taste buds.
Makes me want to eat some food or makes me want to have another sip of that.
Well, and the other thing is, as opposed to cocktails, you could drink more of these because, 2 ounces of this is nowhere near as much as 2 ounces of gin, right?
Yeah.
So alcohol percentage-wise. This is a more traditional European style, high quality dry vermouth.
Okay.
So now what we're going to move on to is Via. And Via is a company that was formed by Quadi Essentia, Quadi Winery Group, which makes Essentia. Essentia is actually the name of their sweet wine. And Michael Deller, who used to be a principal in the Lark Creek Inn. And then I think he just sold one market recently. But at any rate, but this is one of their 3 products that they make. They make 2 dry vermouths and a red vermouth.
2 dries.
2 dries.
One
so
red.
one's whisper dry, one's extra dry.
Okay.
So I brought the whisper dry, which is a little less of that. And you'll see this has a much brighter, fresher, cleaner taste.
This one smells more like wine.
Yes.
To me.
Yes.
Was that the intention?
That's the intention. Exactly right. And so the idea is now you're not trying to mitigate a flaw in the wine by mixing it with the spirit that mutes that flaw. It on its own is delicious. And again, that's one of those things about making cocktails is, as Heidi Kraling said to me, and she's a chef at Ensalada over there in San Anselmo, is that if you can't pick out an ingredient in a recipe, right? If you can't figure it out that it's in there, it shouldn't be in there. Because what's the point? And there are some, there's some backbone kind of products that like in the cocktail world, it'd be elderflower. We don't realize it's there, but it actually enhances other things. But in general, I think she's correct. And so the other thing is don't introduce a product that then you have to try and overcome its flavor. So that's where using a premium vermouth is much better than just buying whatever's on the shelf at Safeway.
Right. The Via is pretty good.
The Via is great. Yeah, I agree. And again, vermouths are relatively inexpensive across the spectrum. The Antica has gone up quite a bit, but the ones that we're tasting here are in the low 20s, right? From the high 18s to the low 20s as far as cost, which is not that bad. And the idea is it's going to last you a lot longer because you're only going to use a little bit of it.
And you're going to keep it in the fridge.
Right, because you don't want it to spoil. But the idea is it's going to greatly enhance the cocktails that you have because it's the same metaphor as like the margarita is always the classic one where people spend all this money on tequila and then nothing on the mixer when it's actually 3-to-1 the other way around.
Right.
And so you should spend your money on the mixer. And not on
They throw Rose's lime juice in there.
Yes.
And then that's when I cringe.
Or they buy pre-mixed, they're too lazy.
Margarita mix.
Yes. Which is terrible.
Yeah.
So there are a few good ones. But anyhow, so the idea is same thing here. Don't introduce a variable that's not good into a cocktail. If you can't drink it on your own, don't use it in your cocktails. It's like cooking, right? They say don't use cooking wine that you don't like.
Yes, don't cook with wine you wouldn't drink.
Right.
Before we do the other two, I want to personally hand you the stack of official Tall Mike Wine podcast coasters. These are for you.
Well, thank you very
to
much.
enjoy at your abode. What do you think of those?
Those are pretty cool.
And if you'd like your very own stack of coasters, you can email me, tallmikewine@gmail.com. What was the teenage Jeff Burkhart like? What were you into?
Cars and girls.
Okay. This would have been the 1970s?
Would have been early 80s.
Early
Yes.
80s.
Yeah.
Okay.
I grew up in Petaluma.
Okay.
Spent a lot of time at the Russian River
Okay.
doing that sort of thing, right? It was a different era.
Sure.
I mean, muscle cars and...
Well, it was a different era because if you think about it, we didn't have the internet yet.
No,
we didn't
did
have
not.
personal computers yet.
No.
So it was like you kind of had to, you had to make your own analog fun.
Well, we had a party line telephone, if you can imagine that.
Well, that goes back a ways.
Yes, it
Well,
does.
more than
Well, I
one
live out in the
family
country, too.
on the
so.
same line, you pick up the phone to make a call, there's already somebody talking.
Right. And someone who doesn't live in your house. Someone who lives down the street somewhere. Yes.
That's awesome. So there were cars, there were girls, there was the Russian River. I'm guessing at some point you had your first drink in that scenario.
Yes, I did.
Tell me what it was. Was it up or on the rocks or was it beer?
It was in a Boda bag.
Okay. Oh, so it was somebody had poured something in the Boda bag.
Yes,
Okay.
It was a concert. It was a who was it? It was Day on the Green with Journey, Cheap Trick, Molly Hatchet, and Black Sabbath.
Oh my God.
And my parents, for some reason, thought that me and my 14-year-old friend would be perfectly fine in the company of his 19-year-old brother at a concert at the Day on the Green.
Okay.
Boy, that was a big mistake. So we piled into his 1968 Le Mans and motored off there with a Boda bag filled with slow gin and 7-Up.
Oh no.
Yes.
That might have been your first time puking too.
It was indeed. And I have not been able to touch slow gin since. And it ruined my Boda bag.
It's out there. Oh yeah. Oh.
If you don't know what a Boda bag is, it was a little like a leather pouch that you could hold against your body in case someone patted you down, and it held beverages.
Yeah, it had a strap on it. They looked kind of manly, this leather strap with a nozzle on the end of it.
Yep.
You'd hold it up and squirt it into your mouth.
Yep.
Good times. Good times. I want to get into your writing now. You've written some books. And you write a column. It's in the local paper here in Marin County, the Independent Journal. Newspapers are still around. Isn't it great?
And doing well, actually. So despite what everyone says.
And I think of the Barfly column as one part slice of life from a bartender's perspective, the hospitality industry as a whole, and then one part philosophy with musings on a bigger picture of life itself and how humans interact. You see a lot of that from behind the bar.
Oh, yeah.
Probably
Every day.
an endless source of inspiration.
Well, the thing is that as much as people are the same, they're different as well. Meaning that there's archetypes of human behavior that travel. Because I have people who read my column all over the country, and it's appeared in 88 different newspapers. And so the idea is, so I get a letter from someone in Iowa and says, "I know that guy." Now they don't know that guy,
Right.
But they know that guy,
Sure.
because there's a person just like that at their bar,
Right.
That's kind of the thing I like to play around with.
And then you have the standard archetypes, which are fairly predictable until you add alcohol.
yeah. Yes.
And then you stir it up a little bit and you really don't know what's going to happen.
Right. And what the constant of me is what you think is going to happen is not often what does happen.
No.
No matter how much experience you have in it, you can predict some things, but
Right.
but some things just come out of left field. And every day, it's a new challenge. And any given shift in the restaurant business, you're going to have that moment where things go bad. It happens every night. And you can't let that be the story of your night. You need to rally, get beyond it, and move on. You've done customer service. You can be speaking to someone directly in front of you, and the person to your left can be acting wildly inappropriate. And you have to be able to compartmentalize that and deal with that while the person you're talking to has no idea that that's going on.
Right.
Right. And sometimes they don't understand that dynamic.
No, you're up there in your brain thinking about 5 or 6 different things.
Right.
But you want to be focused and make the guy you're talking to feel like he's being heard.
Right.
Which is rule number 1 in customer service is acknowledge.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
You need to be seeing that person and make them feel seen and feel heard.
Right.
So let's talk about your column again, because I was a little shocked to read your Facebook post this past Sunday morning when you told everyone that this week's column had been pulled from publication.
Not published at all, actually.
Not published at all. You put it up on your website, so I did read it. To me, it seemed fairly typical of your writing. Do you have it with you there?
I do.
You have it on your phone?
I do.
I'm going to have Jeff read his... I was going to have him do a reading from his book or his column, and then this whole thing happened where his column did not get run by the paper. So I thought, here now on the podcast...
We can do it. Yeah. Let me set it up a little bit. There's no bitterness about this, but I've written for the IJ for 17 years, and I've never, ever had a column rejected. And I've written some pretty racy stuff. So this one was bounced back. I thought, wow, okay, and we're going to move on. Everything's fine. There's nothing there. But I just didn't quite understand why, because one of the things I try and do is create an atmosphere so someone can see what my world is like through my eyes. And I say in this column, which I thought was pretty clever, if I may say that about my own writing, is that observing is not the same as judging. And so the fact that you can see something doesn't mean that you're judging it, but you have to be able to acknowledge that it's that. There was that great commercial. It was the psychologist who was taking people out in the public, and he took them to like a Home Depot. Okay. And there was a clerk with blue hair. And have you seen this commercial? And he says, not. Don't say it. Don't say it. And they're all like, blue, it's blue. And it's like, you can't, yes. I mean, there's nothing wrong with acknowledging that. Right. It's this belief that you can't say anything to anybody. Right. So anyhow, I'm going to preface it with that. And like I said, the IJ didn't run it, but I have my own website, jeffburkhart.net. And from my perspective, my whole column and a lot of what I do bartending is a social experiment for me. Yes. I like to see how people react, why they react the way they do, and just understand the why behind it. So, without further ado, the title of the story is called Read the Room, appropriately. So I walked into the bar and immediately noticed 4 women sitting or standing at the bar. That confusion stemmed from their skirts. All 4 had on skirts that were so short that it would be virtually impossible to sit on them if one were to be sitting on a bar stool. So they stood or sat with their skirts fluttering about or above, leaving an observer confused. I also noticed the abundantly high heels and thigh-high stockings. Halloween comes early and Halloween comes late. It is one of the few holidays where the actual day of the event is inconsequential. People dress up long before and long after the actual day. Unlike the religious holidays or even New Year's Eve, on Halloween, the where and the when are less important than the what. What do we have here? I said to the 21-year-old plus foursome, just as I probably would say to any such foursome knocking at my front door looking for treats. I am a nurse, said the one in white stockings. I am a witch, said the one in black stockings. I am a cop, said the one in blue stockings. Their costumes were identical, except for the colors and an individualized hat. Halloween is really the kickoff to the holiday season, and for all the fuss over what we call the holy days, no one seems to make a fuss about Halloween, a day specifically linked to Samhain, a Gaelic Celtic pagan holiday. But pedantic bar logic is usually limited to such mundane distinctions as which whiskey is the best, as if there is such a consensus on anything, much less whiskey. And what are we supposed to be? I asked the 4th woman in a short red skirt and thigh-high red stockings. What do you mean? She asked. I'm not wearing a costume. Read the room, they say, and boy, I read that wrong. In the bar business, nothing functions the same every time. We bartenders have to adapt. It doesn't pay to be a Giants fan when the bar is full of Dodgers fans. And bartenders are there to get paid, after all. Literally. So I did what I always do when I make a mistake like that. I avoided them. Luckily in the bar business, there's always another end of the bar. So I spent the bulk of my time at the other end. Perhaps a younger version of myself would have tried to fix the initial problem. But I am not younger anymore. And I'm not single either. The other 2 couples weren't together. At least not in the foursome sense. They were a set of 2 separate couples. The guy in one of the couples was wearing a big blonde wig, and his companion was wearing suspenders and a bowler hat with a wispy drawn-on mustache. A man dressed as a woman and a woman dressed as a man. Clever. Or so they thought, because they mentioned it more than once. The other couple was different. 2 women dressed elegantly for a night out. These weren't costumes, but then again, it was still 4 days until Halloween. The 2 women were celebrating something else. What it was, I didn't know, but champagne had been ordered. One of the women was over 6 feet tall, not including the tastefully just high heels. Both wore classic gold jewelry and had modestly manicured nails. They could have easily been sisters, except for one thing. The tall one had a very pronounced Adam's apple. I have learned to notice things. Noticing is not the same thing as judging, and noticing sure helps in the service equation. See Dodgers-Giants metaphor above. And a good default I have learned is to retreat into professionalism. Personality is great, but it's not great to everyone. A joke that some will laugh at is not a joke that all will. But good solid service is always appreciated. Unfortunately, not everyone knows that. Would you guys like another round? I asked the first couple. We're not guys, said the man. Another thing you learn in the service business is that as aware as you might be, the person in front of you can be completely oblivious. We're both women. Get it? He said. Yeah, I got it. So did the other two women. And then so did he, especially when he realized that the taller of the other women outweighed him by 50 pounds and had 6 inches in height on him and clearly lifted weights. He didn't think his joke was so funny after that realization, leaving me with these thoughts. 1, I don't care who you are or what you do, just do it respectfully, or you can leave. 2, the word whiskey is based on the Celtic Irish word uiscí brita, which means water of life. 3, there is no one right answer, which is something you learn after working with the public for a quarter of a century. And 4, one of those two couples were much better tippers. I'll leave it to you to figure out which was which. So anyhow, like I said, I thought relatively benign.
It seemed to me like the typical way your column plays out. You know, this is a story of what happened to me. Here are some fun facts. And then that's kind of the end of the story.
And I like to leave the determinations to the reader, right? They can figure out what they think about it. Right. I'm not there to tell them what to think. I'm just telling them what I observed. At any rate, for whatever reason, it didn't run. But again, available on jeffburkhart.net or on Facebook if you're there.
I will put a link to that column on the show notes here.
Which is one of those great things about the current media environment that we live in is that you can do that.
You can find it. Right. It's out there. You studied journalism at UCSF. What prompted you to go there?
San Francisco State, actually.
Oh, San Francisco State.
Yes. What prompted me to go there was actually the People's Park thing. That was one of the things is if you don't remember, Hayakawa had been at San Francisco State, and that was where a lot of the actual riots during the late 60s, early 70s actually happened. And so that was one aspect. And then I had read Rolling Stone magazine when it was based in the Bay Area here, and I loved it. And there's a couple of stories that I remember. One was the Altamont coverage that really resonated with me. And then there was a story about these surfer kids in LA that I just couldn't believe the detail of their clothing. And that really stuck with me for years, that I could picture those people, even though there were no pictures. So one of the gentlemen who was the associate editor at Rolling Stone magazine, John Burks, was the dean of students at San Francisco State. He and Don Menn, who had founded Guitar Player magazine, were both teachers there. And when I was later in life, because I went back to school when I was just about 30, I decided I want to write, but I want to learn how to make money at writing. I don't want to be that guy who writes one book and spends his whole life doing it only to make nothing on it. Mm-hmm. So I actually was more interested in how can I actually turn this into an industry, and journalism was the thing that I settled on. And those were the teachers that inspired me. And so that's where I went.
That is awesome. And then when did you start writing the column?
I started the column in 2007, but I became an actual professional writer in right around 2000. So later in life, I mean, I'd done a bunch of things. I'd owned a nightclub. Mm-hmm. I'd managed nightclubs. I'd been a bartender for a long time before I even did that.
And then did you compile the columns into the book? Is that what it is?
Yes.
Okay.
So, but I've also, the thing is that I've written for a lot of other publications along mm-hmm. the way. I did some stuff for National Geographic Assignment. I've written for Capture Magazine, Marin Magazine, Modern Living, a bunch of magazines. So it was a way for me to provide people who were interested in my column, because mm-hmm. I've got quite a big fan base. There's quite a bit of readership in that. And that's why, it was funny, we were joking earlier about the death of the newspaper.
Yes.
Everywhere I go, there's 100 people who want to talk to me about that. And that's not the sign of an industry that's failing.
No, there's still a lot of buzz out there.
Yes.
You got a lot of comments on your Facebook post about the column not running.
Yes.
And I'm sure if you count the amount of people that actually clicked on your website that day, I'm sure you got a lot more than you normally do.
Yes.
So your book is called 20 Years Behind Bars, yep. and then there is a sequel, 20 Years Behind Bars, Parole Denied.
Yep.
Are those out there in the world? Can you get them on Amazon?
Yeah, Amazon. Yep. Both were top 100s on Amazon. The first one was a number 22 iBooks bestseller when iBooks was a thing.
Okay.
And I've got a third one coming out in the spring here. So that one will also be 20 Years Behind Bars, where these books are more, the first two books are more stories with cocktails, mm-hmm. right? So there are some recipes in there, but it's not recipe oriented. This next book is actually more recipe oriented with a little more history, but still observational stories.
Okay. Speaking of recipes, how about another splash of vermouth?
So
here?
let's move on to what we're going to do now is we're going to try a company, which is a premium sweet vermouth, which is more traditional in flavor. And again, remember, I brought this primarily as a way to make a distinction with the last one we're going to do. Because as I said earlier, all red vermouth, or almost all red vermouth, unless specifically identified, is made from white wine that's then colored.
That is so complex. This is there's not a red vermouth. It's more a brownish color.
Well, again, vermouths tend to be brown. And remember, even like with brown liquor, right? You got to think like bourbon, for instance, has been called a brown liquor.
Right.
But its original name was red liquor. It was been derogatory because the idea was it's put in burn barrels to look brown,
Right.
but it actually turns out red.
I did not
So
know
where
that.
Scotch and cognac are actually aged for much longer periods of time.
I just want to sniff this one for a
Yeah.
while. There's
Again,
a lot
very
going
vibrant, very alive.
on. There's almost like a banana in there.
Yeah.
A little bit of chocolate. Quite a bit of vanilla. Do you know what they're putting in here?
Well, you know what they say, it's all proprietary. So no, I don't. And they don't have to tell you, right? Because liquor is the only product that does not have to tell you their ingredients.
Yes.
So,
it smells delicious.
I had an interesting conversation with my daughter, who's also a bartender, and she didn't realize, I had to break it to her, that she thought vegan wine. Why did isn't all wine vegan? And it is not.
No, it's something that is way on the inside of winemaking, in that, people on the outside think, well, it's just made of grapes, and they ferment the grapes with yeast. Yeast is not an animal product. Right. There are things involved in what we call fining and filtration, and some of them have to do with animals. One is egg yolks.
Yep.
Egg yolks are a great thing that will bind all of those pieces of sediment in the wine and drop them to the bottom of the barrel. And then there's one made of, is it fish bladders?
Fish bones.
Fish
Isinglass.
bones. Explain that one to me.
So it's ground up fish bones, which are cartilaginous for the most part. They're not as bony as what we think of as calcium derived,
Right.
but it does the same thing. It attracts things to stick to it.
Right.
And then they can remove that
Yes.
in a larger bulk. Basically creates like a paste
Yeah.
of impurities that you remove. And as anyone who knows about wine has stuff in it.
Yeah.
And so even when you're tasting, I've had wine sent back, there's dirt in this. Well, you've clearly never been to a winery if that's going to bother you, because those things are a lot of times open fermented, right? And there's all kinds of dirt is the least of your problems, right? But those two things in particular are animal products.
Is there another vermouth?
Are we moving on already?
Yeah.
Okay. So now this one is
It's only a 40-minute show, Jeff.
This is my favorite, and this is a radically different product.
Okay.
So this is actually Chinato vermouth.
Yep.
And so Chinato means bitter. The idea is Chinato vermouths are more bitter for sure, but there's another distinction. They use red wine. So this is very different in color.
Okay.
It's very different
in flavor. I
in
really did like the accompany.
Yes.
This one is very dark.
Yes.
Starts out as red wine.
Nebbiolo. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, Nebbiolo.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the other thing is it's a DOC wine, which is actually a quality wine, where all other vermouth is made with substandard wine. So the idea is, and when I say substandard, that doesn't mean not drinkable. It just means not designed to be drunk on its own. So again, this is a different one. There are different Chinatos. This is Alicio again.
It's so round.
Yes.
The smell is just so round and beautiful. There's so much going on there.
You can drink this on the rocks all by itself and be perfectly content with that.
I would totally do
Yes.
that. Maybe I'll do
And that's
that.
what it's designed to
I
do.
might have you pour me one before you leave. Take the bottle with you.
And so the idea is that that's exactly what it is. And you think in like, I was in Italy last year, and vermouth spritzes are a big thing. So you would do you can do Bianco vermouth. And remember, the three types of vermouth are white vermouth, which is not dry vermouth, but white. Then there's red vermouth, and then there's dry vermouth. White and red vermouth are virtually the same product. One has food coloring, one does not. That's the difference. Chinato is a subcategory of that. It's a different thing. It's more along the lines of what Punta Mess would be. So it's much harder to find, much higher quality, also a little more expensive.
My God, that's good.
But boy, it makes a great Manhattan.
That's incredible. I always like to say that people who work in the restaurant business don't understand that people don't come to us for vitamins. They come to us for candy. So you're not trying to make them healthy or better or You're just trying to give them what they need and make it happy and fun and sweet.
That's right. You're not trying to discourage anyone from anything, right? I'm not there to tell you how to do things. There is a trend in the bar business for people to start doing that. Mm-hmm. And I think that's not a smart way to go.
It's out there in a niche, and there are, the craft cocktail bars where people come like, oh, tell us about this.
Right.
And that's like, okay, let's slow everything way down.
And that's okay
right.
if they're asking.
It's a different kind of thing.
What I'm talking about is the bartender doing that even when not asked.
Yeah.
Right. That's problematic. My favorite is I did an episode of America's Test Kitchen, and Chris Kimball, the host, told me a story off air about ordering an old fashioned at a bar in Chicago, and he sent it back because he said I didn't understand what it was. It was one of these house old fashions that was radically different than whatever. And so the bartender came over to the host of America's Test Kitchen and said, "You don't know what an old fashioned is, obviously." And that is not good customer service.
Talking down to people.
No, that is never a good idea.
It's not going to end well.
No.
It's not going to end well.
And that's not your role, right? No. And some people take it on as their role, and I think that's a big mistake.
Yeah. Again, read the room.
Yes.
Tell me about the podcast.
So with the podcast in 5th year now, I do it in conjunction with Kevin Blum, who's the founder and managing editor of Marin Dish, which is an entertainment aggregate website and that sort of thing. He used to work for Yelp when we first started doing the podcast. And the whole point was we talk about issues in the restaurant business. I was on the inside of the restaurant business. He was on representing the outside of the restaurant business. So the customer and the employee sort of thing.
Point counterpoint.
Kind of, yes.
How often do you produce a new episode of the podcast?
It's about every 2.5, 3 weeks.
Oh, okay. So. I don't feel so bad now. I started this podcast almost 4 years ago, and I was doing 2 or 3 episodes a month.
Yeah.
And I really liked it. But then as I've gotten better at doing it, it's actually gotten harder to do. And now I'm lucky if I do 2 in a month.
Yeah.
And I feel bad about that. But I do it when I do it. And I appreciate you participating.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the invite.
Well, thanks for hanging out.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me.
I really appreciate it. Give the website another plug.
JeffBurkhart.net.
Okay, JeffBurkhart.net.
And if you're looking, all you got to do is punch in Jeff Barfly into any search engine, and you'll get anywhere you want to go.
Jeff Barfly, the Barfly himself, on the Tall Mike Wine Podcast. The podcast was conceived and is written, produced, edited, and maintained by yours truly. For your very own stack of official Tall Mike Wine Podcast coasters, send me an email, tallmikewine@gmail.com. If you've just discovered the show, be sure to scroll through the earlier episodes. There are a lot now, going back almost 4 years. If you love the podcast, drop a little cash on it to keep it commercial free. $3 a month, or $5, or $10 if you're a big spender. Makes you a sponsor and gets you my extreme gratitude. Just click the support the show link in the show notes. Thank you in advance. To see behind the scenes with Jeff and me and all my guests, plus all the food I cook and wine I drink when I'm not podcasting, follow me on Instagram at TallMikeWine. I'm about to head out on my yearly wine vacation. When you hear me next, I'll be in the Pacific Northwest. If you should encounter me in a tasting room in Oregon or Washington, I'll be the tall guy with the microphone. Be sure to say hello. That wraps episode 59. Thank you, Jeff Burkhart, for hanging out. I'm Mike Stone. Keep swirling, keep sniffing, keep sipping. Cheers.